Welcome to the No Limit Selling Podcast, where industry leaders share their advice on how you can become better, stronger, faster. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the No Limit Selling Podcast. And the reason I do this podcast, turns out, is not for you. It's actually for me, because my highest value is learning new cool things, and hopefully you enjoy it too. And today I feel privileged because we have two amazing authors with us today. So I'm going to be in learning mode. We've got Bob Burg. He is the co-author of The Go-Giver, which is a phenomenal book that a lot of people have read. And Paul Smith has written books about storytelling because, that's such an ancient thing that we do that we take for granted, but stories are so powerful. Mark Antony's speech to Caesar was all about telling a freaking awesome story that, moved a nation. Bob, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Coach Umar. Paul, great to see you.
Yeah, you as well, Bob and Coach. Thanks for having us both on.
Welcome to the program. So, Bob, why don't we start with you? Oftentimes, we give lip service to, it's all about the customers, it's all about being of service, when in reality, it's all about us. So how do you get people to switch from truly being of service to others and knowing that that is a great way that leads to opportunities?
Well, yeah, you make a great point, because human nature says it is about us, right? And yet, as I often say when addressing sales groups, nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet, right?
We're not.
Right?
When did this happen?
Exactly. They're not going to buy from you because you need the money, or actually even because you're a really nice person. They're going to buy from you because they believe that ultimately they will be better off by doing so than by not doing so. So for an entrepreneur or salesperson or a leader, to be able to have people to be able to influence others to move in a certain direction, they've absolutely got to tap into what that other person needs, wants, desires. Those who do that the best are the ones who accomplish the most.
Absolutely. And Paul, from your point of view, the same question, oftentimes the stories we tell are where I'm a hero, Paul. And sometimes it's all about me. And is that an effective way to storytell and build connections?
Typically not. And, I think probably the best insight I've heard on that, and Bob, you may remember who said this. I'd love to give him credit for it. I just can't remember. But it was basically to be the best salesperson, what you want to consider yourself is as the assistant buyer. So there's a buyer out there.
That years ago.
Ziegler. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yeah. Consider yourself the assistant buyer. Your job is not to sell something. Your job is to help them find what they need. And if that happens to be something that you sell, that's great for you, but it might be somebody else. And anyway, yes, definitely stories are an important part of being a good salesperson. But until you've heard your prospect or buyer tell you their stories, how are you going to know which of your stories to tell them, or what their needs really are? So I dedicate a whole chapter in one of my books on how do you get the buyer to tell you stories, not just you tell them stories, so that you have a much deeper understanding of what the problem is that you're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
So two things there, right? So that quote that you gave, the assistant buyer quote, certainly, Paul says, you need to be the assistant buyer. That has some utility to it, but saying, who was it? Zig Ziglar? All of a sudden it has more gravitas to it, and it's a richer idea. So sometimes, which is like an important thing, right? So in both of what you guys said, the underlying currency is trust. That I cannot give Bob something. Hey, Bob, I want to give you this gift. And Bob doesn't know me. It's like, what's your motive? Like, why are you doing this? There's an immediate reaction. And to get people to tell you a story, they will not tell you a story unless there's trust. So, Paul, we'll start with you. How important is trust in storytelling?
Yeah, it's very important. But in fact, stories can help you build that trust faster than, quite frankly, earning it the old-fashioned way, which could take months or years. There's something about human nature that we naturally trust people who we know personally, and we naturally distrust people who we don't know. but you share a few personal stories, and that just moves you inside the circle of trust, even if honestly you don't even belong there yet. But just the default setting for humans is trust people we know until they give us a reason not to. Don't trust people that we don't know until we know them. And storytelling, unlike reading them your resume, can move you into that circle of trust.
Two things kind of come up there. Number one, you sound like Robert De Niro in that movie, where it's the circle of trust, and
Yeah.
Ben Stiller's outside the circle.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's true. It's true.
Absolutely.
In fact, I'll go one step further. I'll tell you when I did research for my third book, the Sell with a Story book. Of course, I interviewed a lot of salespeople, but obviously I also interviewed a lot of professional buyers, right? Professional procurement managers. And one of the questions I asked all of them was, what is it that a salesperson can do to immediately earn your trust? And almost all of them gave me the same answer, or one of two answers. One was, tell me when you made a mistake before I hear about it from somebody else. And the second one is, tell me when you cannot help me, or you're not the best solution to my problem. And I think the reason for those is obvious, right? If you're going to be honest with me when you're not the best solution for me, I'm more likely to believe you when you tell me you are the best solution for me. And also, if you admit to your mistakes before I find out about it from my boss, I'm more likely to, trust you with more things in the future, because you'll come and help me fix them. But the thing is, you can't just tell people up front, oh, look, I'll always tell you if I'm not the best solution, or I'll always that's not believable. What is believable is when you tell them a story about the last time you actually did that with one of your other customers. And now, well, you actually do this, right? So now it's believable. So there you've gone back that a story has helped you earn trust in a way that didn't demand a story, but a story is the best way to gain it.
So one of the old things that, there's nothing new in sales, plus or minus. So there's an old strategy, feel, felt, found. Mm-hmm. Bob, I feel your pain. Found, I had a client. This was their situation, and that's what they did. And feel, felt, this is how they felt. And you tell that story, and this is the epiphany they got, and that builds trust. And according to neuroscience, that's kind of where I play in. And they put people in fMRI machines to actually validate this. The number one tool for building trust is storytelling, because we are hot-wired to receive stories. So, Bob, same question to you. In order to connect with people, how important is trust before you become the go-giver?
Well, I don't think it's before becoming it. I think that's how you do become it. I think it's just part of the action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something I've said for, I guess, since I wrote my first book 30 years ago, 35 years, whatever it was, and that was called Endless Referrals. And the central theme, the basic premise of that book was that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. So I put a very high value of importance upon trust. One of my favorite books is called The Speed of Trust. It was written by Stephen M.R. Covey, who's the son of the late Dr. Stephen Covey of 7 Habits fame. And the subtitle of the book, to The Speed of Trust, is The One Thing That Changes Everything. And what Stephen is saying in here is that when there is trust, things happen quickly, right? There are less meetings, there's less, bureaucracy, there's less of everything that can really get in the way of a situation, a positive situation for everyone taking place. When there's no trust, low trust, lack of trust, that's when the works get gummed up. That's when bureaucracy sets in. That's when things are double checked, triple checked, quadruple, and so forth. And a couple of really good quotes in the forward to the book is, he says, take communication. In a high trust relationship, you can say the wrong thing and people will still get your meaning. In a low trust relationship, you can be very measured, even precise, and they'll still misinterpret you. So, we see just how important trust is. Now, I love what Paul does when he puts, earning that trust in the form of a story to help you communicate that trustworthiness, even better. And when you can take that situation where you have a story about how you were able to serve someone who wasn't sure if blah blah blah, or how you did it by referring them to someone else, even though, and now you can even you go a step above it when your current customer or client puts that in a testimonial endorsement for you, or does a video on that, which you have right on your website that you can share, and it says, there's no one I trust more than Mary. And the reason why is because when we first met, and she was sharing her product with me, she came to the conclusion that what I had was not best for her at this time. And she recommended me to someone else. Well, since then, I've recommended Mary to everybody in my network, blah, blah, blah. Now there's a story that this person's, wow, so sure. I mean, I think that any way we can legitimately go about communicating trustworthiness, especially in a society in which trust, and every report on trust basically has said that, we are living in a low trust society right now.
Yeah. Definitely.
So that salesperson or entrepreneur or leader who can not only be trustworthy, it starts there, but who can communicate that trustworthiness, or as Paul would do it in the form of a story, well, that person's really 9 steps ahead of the game in a 10-step game.
Absolutely. 2 things kind of come up there. Number one, that how you tell the story. And one of the ways to tell the story is to feel the emotions in the story. Because when I feel those emotions, if there was excitement and I'm telling that it was a very exciting time, there's a disconnect. But if I'm feeling the excitement, we all have mirror neurons, and you can't help but get excited too. And if there was a point where there was people were unsure and there was anxiety, and you feel it as a storyteller, they feel it too. And when you get them to the other side of the story, it has an impact too. So taking them on that emotional journey is so critical. And the second thing is, trust is a cliche. Like, we all know we need it, but the question is, how do you get it? So let's play a game. And Paul, I'm going to kick it off with you. And what I'd like you to do is give us one technique to build trust. And then Bob's going to go, and I get to go third because, it gives me time to think of one. And then I'm going to go back to you, Paul, and we'll keep on going till we run out of advice for people to build trust with their employees, their bosses, and most importantly, their customers. Take it away, Paul. What's one technique or tip?
Well, I think I've already covered 3 of them. So
reiterate one of them.
I would go back to them. So, first
just
of all,
do one.
Share personal stories so that people get to know you personally. And that just brings you into that circle of trust that De Niro was talking about. So
nice.
Don't just introduce people to your professional accomplishments. Let them get to know you, your family, whatever, through stories in a personal way, and that will earn you some level of immediate trust.
Bob, how about you?
So I think one of the best ways of building trust is to focus on that person from the moment you meet them. So let's say, for example, you meet someone at an event somewhere, could be a charity event, could be a local business social event, it doesn't matter. And you find out in this person, you ask what they do, and they tell you they sell copying machines to businesses or what have you. And they ask what you do. And, at this point, here's where I'm going to say, do not give them any kind of either benefit statement, elevators, or anything like that, because right now that person's level of interest in you and in what you do can be summarized in 3 words. They don't care. They care about themselves. And so one of the best ways to immediately begin communicating trust is to ask questions about them that have them talking about themselves, right? We've all been in the situation, even if just once in our lives, where we were in a conversation with someone who let us do practically all the talking, right? Didn't we come away from that conversation saying to ourselves, wow, what a fascinating conversationalist that person is. Well, it's the same here. So when you ask Gary, how did you get started selling copying machines? This is a question. It's not a slick question, a clever question, but it's just a question people love to answer, because you're basically asking him, picking up on Paul, you're asking him to share his story.
Absolutely.
To do, right? People love to share theirs. And so you're asking, how did you get started as an office products professional? Now, here's the thing. This question is about as mundane as a question could be, but how many times has Gary been asked by anyone to share his story?
Never.
His own family has never asked him to share
Right.
it.
So brilliant idea.
And here's you who's just met him and you're asking him to share. So as he's doing this, he feels great about you. And that's the first step toward trust.
Love that. So one of the things I often do is people actually kind of suck at telling you what they do. They'll give you like some clumsy description. So one of the things I ask in that networking setting is, so Bob, who are you here to meet? Like, who's an ideal customer? And they go, this is an ideal customer. So, oh, I just met John. Let me go introduce you to John. And you introduce them to a customer that they can get. It's a great way of building trust. And if you articulate what they do in a way oftentimes better than they did themselves, they're like, whoa. And you're helping them network more effectively. And oftentimes that really helps a lot.
Oh yeah. Well, I first introduced this question in Endless Referrals, again, back in the early 90s or whatever. And that is to what I call the one key question. And that is, Dave or Gary or Mary, how can I know if someone I'm speaking with is a good potential client for you? And here's the thing, when they answer, they're not going to talk about the bells, whistles, or whatever of their product or service, but they're going to kind of tell a story to help you. Now, this person who sells copying machines might say, well, if you're ever in an office and you notice a copying machine, and next to that copying machine's a waste paper basket, which is filled to the rim and overflowing with crumpled up pieces of paper, that's a really good sign that copying machine's been breaking down a lot lately. And that would be an excellent prospect for me. So he's just shown you, he's just told you how to add value to his life, which again, just kind of gets that trust meter to rise.
Love that. So Paul, to you, what's another technique for trust?
Yeah. So that second one I mentioned was let the prospect know that you will be honest with them when you do not have the best solution for them. So let me give you an example of that. One of the guys I interviewed was in procurement at Kroger Corporation. And he told me about a time where they were having IT issues. And so he was interviewing salespeople from several big tech companies, HPs and SAPs and companies like that. And he brought a couple of salespeople in one at a time. And the first guy, as he was telling him, as the Kroger person was telling the salesperson about his problems, the response he kept getting was, oh yeah, we can fix that. Oh yeah, we got a solution for that. Oh yeah, no problem. We can fix that. The next guy he brought in, every time he started to explain the problem, he looked at him kind of puzzled and he scratched his head and he took some notes. And at the end of it, he said, I've never seen that problem before. I don't know anybody who's got that problem. Let me think about it for a while and I'll get back to you. Now it probably won't surprise either of you that he hired the second guy. And the reason is because he knew the problems they were having were not common ones, that there should be off the shelf solutions just waiting for. So he knew the first guy was just BSing his way through the sales call, and he knew the second guy was not. And so he didn't know which one had a better solution, but he went with the second guy because he trusted him. And he trusted him because the guy was honestly reacting to a novel problem instead of pretending that he knew what it was and knew he had a solution. So that's a way to earn trust quickly.
Great example. Great story.
So absolutely. And when you show your vulnerabilities, most people, and especially in our society, don't show any weakness. That's actually a sign of strength when you do that. So one of the ways to build trust with people is to listen. It's just such a lost art. You can tell when someone is paying attention to you and when someone else is just waiting for you to shut up and so they can actually tell you what they want to tell you. And if you can do the privilege of attending someone, and a lot of that revolves around getting feedback on what they just said in a different way, asking questions, asking stories, and delving in. And something as simple as a slight head nod goes a long way in doing that. Thank you for doing that, Paul.
On
So,
cue.
Bob, next one's to you.
Well, what you said, asking questions and then listening, really listening, is so very key. As human beings, we all want to be understood. We want to feel understood. And when someone really, 100% is listening to us, and doing things such as asking clarifying questions to make sure that what they said is and what we heard is what they meant, because we know we all come from a different set of beliefs, different ways of seeing the world, what I call our unconscious operating system, right? So sometimes a prospective client might give you an answer and we assume that what they said, that we understand it the same way, and we might not. Right. And so when we when we say, and we very tactfully say, just for my own clarification, or just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, when you say X, what exactly, and then we do that. Now a person knows, wow, okay, this person's not just giving ear service instead of lip service. This person's really listening to what I'm saying. And I think that trust, that again, inspires trust. Another thing that inspires trust is doing what you say you're going to do. So,
That's a radical idea.
Yeah. If you say you're going to send some information to someone, that information needs to be sent, and it needs to be sent correctly, and it needs to be sent timely.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so it's those little things that we do. But, there's the old saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think that, we may believe that about ourselves. I do, but someone might not, but other people definitely believe it about us. So when we do something that even something little, that basically tells them how we're going to do everything.
Yeah, just to add to that before I change tracks where we're heading is, when you don't live up to your word, I'm going to send you this thing tomorrow morning, first thing. But when I call you up, Bob, and say, hey, Bob, this emergency came up. I'm not able to send you this morning, but I will do it later on this afternoon. That extends that trust in a massive way, because most people will just pretend it never happened. Right. And just coming in when you're going to break your word, call them and let them know why is a huge trust builder. So let's change tracks now. Paul, my sister, you may know her. If you look in the Webster's dictionary under the worst storyteller ever, Syra Alexander is there. So what are some tips to tell a good story?
Oh, yeah. Well, there are so many, but let's start with, make sure you're telling a story for the right reasons, which kind of goes back to the trust issue. Mm-hmm. If you're telling stories just to further your own purposes without considering your audiences, then they're probably not going to be well received stories. In fact, when I teach storytelling, one of the topics I obviously cover is emotional engagement, and how do you engage the audience emotionally through story? What are the techniques that you can use in storytelling to create emotional connections? And one of the things I have to talk about is, how do you not abuse that power of storytelling and not overly emotionally manipulate your audience? And one of the tests I give my students is, make sure that your audience would welcome this emotional engagement in your story. And because if they wouldn't welcome it, then you're foisting it upon them and they don't want it. And it probably will come across as manipulative instead of welcome. There's probably a lot of things in there. So, starting with, make sure you're telling it for the right reasons. Secondly, you do need to have some emotional engagement in your stories. Otherwise, your stories aren't stories. They're case studies. They're more like, Harvard Business School, the VP sat in his office and was scratching his head and wondering what to do about next week's, production issues, but the stories need to be about real people with real problems that have real emotional reactions to them. And in fact, I think the best definition of a story I've ever heard came from a novelist named E.M. Forster, who said that a story is nothing more than a fact plus an emotion. And he gave a brilliantly simple example of that. He said, if I were to tell you that the king died and then the queen died, well, that wouldn't be a story, would it? It's just a fact, or it's two facts. King dies, then queen dies. But if I were to tell you that the king died and then the queen died of grief, now that's a story. And why is that a story? It's a story because all of a sudden you can imagine what must have happened. Oh my gosh, the queen, she must have so loved the king that when he died, she stopped eating, and so she withered away. Or maybe she was so distraught that she took her own life. Like, all these stories come to mind because of the last two words of grief. The emotion was the glue that pulled all those facts, those two facts together and made it an actual story. So I think emotional engagement is probably a defining characteristic of storytelling.
Of good storytelling,
Wonderful.
absolutely. So I think one of the things, if you're going to tell a good story, is if you have off-the-cuff stories, rehearsing them is really useful. And if you can make sure you make a point out of it as well. And and sometimes you need to actually make sure you articulate the point so the other person really gets it. And assuming they do isn't always what's really going on. So don't beat them over the head with it. Like, for example, it's all about trust. Well, let me tell you about the time I was in Yemen and this was going on. And when this happened, a stranger came up and said this, and this allowed me to trust them and save my life. And so it's all about how you connect with people, is all about how you can help people, or something like that. Just it's a nice way of closing it off, and you make sure they get the epiphany you wanted. Helps. Any tips on storytelling, Bob?
No, I mean, I think Paul did a great summary in a very brief period of time. I think in certain things with the Go Giver, and of course, John David Mann was the great storyteller. I'm much more of a how-to guy. John's a wonderful storyteller. He and Paul would get along great. But one thing is having a big idea, a main idea. It's sort of what it's sort of what grabs. I don't know if grab is the right word. I don't think it is in this case, but it's what keeps the reader's interest, because they know everything's going to revolve around that. So when we talk about, let's say, the Go Giver, and it was shifting Joe from a focus totally, Joe was the protege in the story, helping him shift from a focus just on himself, who owed what to Joe and why Joe should be, this and that, to all of a sudden Joe shifting his focus to adding immense value to the lives of others. It was always centered around that giving of value type of idea, so people could follow that thread, throughout. So I think having that is very important. I think also having the challenges within there. What kept Joe from being successful, even as he started to kind of get it and know what to do? What obstacle came into Joe's path that kept him? And I think one reason for this is because it's very relatable to everyone, because we've all had those kinds of experiences. So I think that's just another element in the story.
Yeah, Coach, can I follow up on something you just said about having a message or a lesson and making sure that they get it? I think that's important, but one of the things I try and teach people is give the audience a chance to come to that conclusion themselves first before you hit them over the head with your lesson. And the reason is because one of the things about storytelling that's just almost magical is that it's a vehicle to turn your ideas into their ideas, right? People are far more passionate about pursuing their own ideas than they're ever going to be about pursuing your ideas, right? That's human nature. So what you want is for whatever your ideas are to become their idea, not that you've given them your idea and it's still your idea that they just got from you. And storytelling works because you tell them a story. There's an obvious lesson in there that they're going to learn, but they learned it themselves by listening to the story instead of you telling them what the lesson is. And so what I always tell them is tell the story up to the far enough into the story for the lesson to be obvious, and then stop and just listen. I mean, presumably you're having a conversation with someone, right? And it's a requirement that you let them talk at some point. This is that moment, right? So pause and listen, because probably what they're going to do is tell you what they thought of the story and what they learned from it. And if they learned the right lesson, great, you're done. Your idea has now become their idea, and they're probably going to go do what you want them to do. Now, on the off chance that they didn't get the lesson right, then you have to tell them. And that's fine. You can always just fall back on what you would have said anyway if you didn't tell them a story. Yeah, and you could just redirect them. Bob, that's one conclusion you could draw. I thought of a different one, and that I think is better. And here are my reasons why. You can always fall back on that kind of a response, but give them the chance to articulate the lesson first, because it will be more effective if you let them do that.
Absolutely. And it goes back to our conversation around trust. Is when you have trust, you can actually have that real conversation, which is like, hey, Umar, your idea is pretty good, but this would make it better. And because we have trust, I'm more willing to go, that's a brilliant point. Paul, you should write a book about storytelling. In fact, write 3 books about it. Yeah. So here's the last thoughts on storytelling is that it's all about brain chemistry. And if I told a story where the protagonist gets to a place where he's unsure what to do, if you tell it well, everybody listening to that story is leaning forward, and their brain chemistry is one of curiosity. And so by storytelling, you have the ability to change the brain chemistry in the heads of the people you're telling the story to, which is like pretty freaking amazing, right? So before we part company today, and thank you very much for this interview, Paul, I'll start with you. What's a lesson that you wish you had learned a lot earlier in your career that served you well?
Well, I'll follow up on what you just said about that brain chemistry and the curiosity that it creates in the audience. One of the things I learned from my friend Richard Crevelin, who's a movie director out in Hollywood, is that you can, as a storyteller, you can choose the emotional state that you put your audience in based on how much information you give them relative to the characters. So, for example, and he calls it, superior position or inferior position or equal position. So if you put your audience in superior position, that means the audience knows more than the characters do. The example of that is the woman's walking through the kitchen and there's a man behind the curtain with a knife. And you, as the person watching the movie or hearing the story, she's about to get stabbed, but she doesn't know that, right? You are in superior position. That creates angst and anxiety on the part of the audience, right? But if you do the opposite, if you put the audience in inferior position, that's like a Sherlock Holmes novel where Sherlock Holmes has got it figured out. He knows who done it, right? But you and Dr. Watson don't know. And Sherlock Holmes has got to bring you along and coach you till you figure out who done it. That is the one that creates that curiosity. You're like, oh, I want to know who done it. And he already knows, but I want to know, right? So that position you put them in, you can choose where to put those emotions. Is it curiosity? Is it anxiety? And then when you put them in equal position, the audience kind of mirrors the emotional state of the characters. So if somebody jumps out on the movie screen, somebody jumps out to scare you, it scares the main characters at the same time it scares the audience. So you're in exactly equal position. So that I think that's not a freshman level, that's an advanced level storytelling skill, but it's a very powerful one.
So Bob, I'm going to give you the last word because I know I need to get you out of here in 3 minutes for your next appointment. Any last words you want to share, Bob?
There really aren't. I've enjoyed the conversation immensely. Have enjoyed learning from Paul. Gosh, his books just sound absolutely fantastic. And any aspiring writer, speaker, storyteller should absolutely get those books and tap into that wisdom. So I appreciate that. And Coach Umar, always appreciating you, and have just really enjoyed being with all of you for this conversation.
Thank you very much. Let me close out the show. We'll chat for like 30 seconds before we let you go. Bob, here we go. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. And if you're looking for more tools, go to my website at NoLimitSelling.com. I've got a free mind training course there that's going to teach you some insights from the world of neuro-linguistic programming, and that is the fastest way to get better results.